Afternoon folks, welcome back to the channel. Today we are doing a clutch change on the Kawasaki, or modified Kawasaki ER5. Do you love it?
Yeah.
Side note, you'll see I've recovered these out of the shed. I'm going to paint those up in matte black. Puts a sheepskin covers most of that anyway, but decided to put them back on, tidy up a little bit. Anyway, back to clutch. Reason for changing the clutch is seems a bit grabby, sticks a lot, and I even wonder when you're accelerating sometimes whether it's slipping. It's hard for me to tell, not knowing what these bikes were like originally. It's got 28,500 miles on it, so if it's never had one, there's a good chance it's not in the best of fettle. So one of the main reasons is it's quite snatchy, and when it's been stood a bit it does stick on, which they can do anyway. I just thought for the price of a clutch kit, try and make it a bit smoother. KJ has a bit of bother with it sometimes, and I just think like turning corners and that, and I think a lot of it's related to it being a little bit edgy. I've already drained the oil, removed the oil filter, due a change anyway, so I'm not wasting anything. Side note, probably always say this when I do things, but always remove your oil filler. Make sure you can remove your oil filler before draining your oil. I learnt that the hard way, I think, changing the oil probably on the transfer box or gearbox, can't remember, on the Land Rover when I couldn't get the filler out. So here we go, I've got the manual. Don't think I'll massively need it other than perhaps for some torque specs. I've had a little look through, doesn't look particularly different to other ones that I've done. So the next thing I've done is loosen up these bolts here. We put a new cable on this when we got it, so that was fairly easy. Loosen that up. In order to get it loose, I've easy to pop it off at the top end, and then I need to unhook it here, because I loosened it at the top end. It gives you lots of, you can pull it through, so you got lots of slack to play with, and easily unhook it from here. And then that can just stay there, that won't get in the way because it's all coming off here. So next thing is just loosen all these bolts around here, not these ones because that's your water pump, so you don't want to disturb that. They should come off independently of this. I like to do these alternately I should say, same way you would when doing them up. So you gradually crush your gasket evenly rather than all in one area. Let's nearly them all off. Got those two next to each other, but no big deal. So that's those all loose. So just to illustrate, I've drawn a picture of the side of the case, marked the 11 bolt holes, made a couple of references to like the oil filler window, the oil plug, etc. So there's 11 bolts to come out. I'll lay that down on the shed floor and lay the bolts down beside it. They may all be the same size, but it's just good practice. If there's any dodgy threads or anything, they can go back in the same place. There'll also be some dowels, some oil dowels in there, so I'll make reference to where they belong when I take off the case and put them down in the right place. I've actually just decided to poke holes in there so they can stab in, and then they'll definitely not blow away. There's a bit of black coming off on these bolts. I don't know if it's gasket on some of them or what, but we'll soon see. In the I checked my oil capacity in the manual just to make sure I had enough oil, because I've pre-soaked my clutch plates, or I should say KJ's clutch plates, but just handily just noted here that it does have the capacity on the side, 3.4 litres. I think that is at oil and filter change. It might even be when reassembly, but because we are doing quite a bit of sort of reassembly, it'll take the vast majority of that. And I've got a 4 litre can, over 3 litres left in the can, and the rest with the clutch plates soaking in it, but I've put it in a clean container, so if I need any extra I can utilise that. So that is our cardboard case with the relevant bolts stuck in it. So with casings and things like these, usually, obviously when they've been on a long time, maybe even if they've not been on a long time, you might just need to, once you've loosened everything, just encourage it with a soft hammer just to break the seal. So this is a rubber faced mallet. So just to shock it off, a bit like a impact driver. There will be got another one here, a little slightly harder one. like I say, there'll be a dowel in there, so we'll have to just leave it off, but this will just help loosen everything. You usually have to just pull these away, sort of helps lever it off. So it looks like it's probably sticking on this dowel here. I'll just get something to encourage it off, pry it gently. So I've got both a gasket scraper and a little pry bar, so we shall see what we need. There we go. Yeah, you can just see there's a dowel in at that point. It's just sticking a bit. So that's what your clutch lever operates on. Doesn't look like the gasket's stuck very badly, so hopefully that won't be a nightmare to get off. You need to be very careful removing gaskets like that on machined faces, so as not to have a leak later down the line or when you put it back together. So next thing, I'll clean up these gasket faces on both sides, and we've just got to note that one little dowel here that doesn't look like it's going to go anywhere, so I'll probably just leave that in situ rather than risk damaging it. So I won't film all of this because it'll be fairly monotonous. You'll note to get this off, I'm using a fresh Stanley blade. You have got to be very careful because you're working on a, whatever it is, aluminium, magnesium case, whatever, alloy case, that it's very easy to damage it. So if you do choose to do the same, do so at your own risk. That's what I've always done, but you do have to be very gentle. Just spotted there's also another dowel in the case down here. So that's everything cleaned up. I've not touched the clutch itself yet. Cleaned up all the faces. I did remove both dowels and put them back just to make sure they were clean. Took the opportunity to clean out the sight glass for the oil level as best I could, using some cotton buds from behind. Cleaned up all the case. The majority of the gasket was stuck on this cover itself rather than on the actual casing, which made it easier to operate on. There was some stuck down here which was tricky to get in with the blade, so I mainly did it with my fingernail. So that's most of that off. This just pulls out. Just cleaned round the seal. There's an oil seal in here, so I just cleaned round in there. Just put a bit of grease back on before I pop this back in place. Also this, I don't know what you call it, sear or pin or whatever, had some little, you can just see here where it's shiny, had some indentations where it had worn over time, pulling on that, so I've just ground those out gently, because obviously anything with jaggedy edges isn't going to help it being smooth, so just hopefully that'll be okay. And yeah, cleaned it all up as best we can with some brake and clutch cleaner. Same on here. I'm going to go have my lunch now and then I'll come back and tackle the actual clutch itself. So before I get stuck into actually doing the clutch, I'm going to fit the oil filter back on, a new oil filter. This is a high flow one. I've had it in the shed for a while. I bought a few at the time when we got this new. I got it new, it's second hand. So I'll go ahead and just pop that on, otherwise I'll end up forgetting. I've already cleaned all around the oil filter nicely. This looks to have slightly pre-lubricated seal, but I will just put a bit of engine oil on there as good practice, and then get that popped on. So that's that on. I don't like to do these much above, well, don't use any tools on it, just do it hand tight. Nearly as hard as I can go with an oily hand. You can always just check that again. That way you ensure you don't bunch up the gasket O-ring or whatever it is on the filter, and it'll slip on nicely with the oil on it. And if you don't over tighten, it will be fine. You can always, like I say, check it after a ride and when it's cooled down, and check that it's still firm, or keep an eye on it when you're riding. So the next job is to loosen up these 5 bolts which hold your pressure plate onto your clutch plates, and there's springs underneath each of these. Just a quick side note, this is the gasket I'm using, an Athena gasket to replace when we get to that point, and this is the clutch kit that I'm using from Wemoto. I think it was about £85. I'll put a link below if anybody's interested. In here you get all the clutch plates and new springs, and also the metal clutch plates, because I didn't know what state the ones that are on the bike will be in, so I'm going to replace all those as well. The actual friction plates are just soaking in some oil in the shed, so I'll get them out when we get to that point. They're only on fairly loose. So take all those off. I'm using the impact driver just to remove things, but I won't be using it to reinstall, or at least not up to torque anyway. So those off, relatively easy so far. Then you just pull your little lever, pops off your pressure plate, and then hope that bearing's okay in the middle, which it seems to be. Have a little look at that. Keep that clean so you don't get that bearing dirty. If you're taking this off and replacing and putting them back on, I'd obviously note the order in which they came off, but I'm going to replace them anyway, so as long as I make sure I put my old plates and stuff back in the right place, I won't do, but I will just take note of how things come out. A bit of rust on that thing, we'll clean all that up as we're at it. Plates don't look massively worn, but there's a bit of corrosion on the metal plates, and I think, I'm no expert, but I think these look a bit glazed. I may be wrong. Somebody who knows what they're talking about can have a look at that and tell me if you think that looks a bit glazed. It does to me, but I might be wrong. And they vary a bit, but this, like that one particularly, it stood a lot of the time, this bike. Well, it's been stood in our ownership, but before that I believe it was stood around quite a long time, and you can see rust that's stuck on some of these. If you get moisture in the casing and then it's stood around and not coated in oil, that'll be why it's getting quite sticky. So it will not do it any harm or replacing this. That's the final friction plate, I think. So you start with a friction plate. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You've got 7 friction plates, and then in terms of loose metal plates, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've got 6 of those. They do look discoloured, some of them, like they've been subject to heat. So if you just look on the outside, there's a few different colours. Like I say, I don't think this is bad idea replacing this all. I'll give everything in there a clean up with some clutch cleaner, being careful where I'm spraying it, and then put in the new clutch. We're just having a quick look at this before I start cleaning it, and that looks in pretty good condition, to be fair. Doesn't look to be any worn corners or jaggedy bits. I'll have a closer look as I start cleaning, but that all appears to be okay. I believe you can get some, like, you can get worn or spiky bits on these that you might need to just fettle with a file to get a bit more life out of them, but on the face of it, it all looks okay to me. So that's everything cleaned up. These recesses had collected quite a lot of sort of rusty looking crud. Clean those up using a toothbrush and some brake and clutch cleaner to help clean that off. Cleaned up this back plate that's part of your clutch basket as well. That has got a slight visible groove in it, but you can't really feel it with your fingernail at all, so I'm hoping that will be okay. I'm not replacing it anyway, so fingers crossed. But that's it all cleaned up. Still got the oil plug out. I have put the oil filter on, but I left the oil plug out just so any brake and clutch cleaner and stuff, excess stuff, can find its way out. And I've left that a bit of time just to dry to make sure that's evaporated. This is what I've been doing with the clutch plates. Soaked them overnight in the oil that we will be using. So we'll take those out ready to fit. Kept the oil clean because I may need some of it, so I need to be careful not to get any crap in there. This is the oil that I'm using in this particular bike because it's not overly expensive. Yeah, it's part synthetic engine oil. So we want 1 friction plate followed by a metal plate. I will just give that a slight dunk in the oil. Kidding, that don't fit. Bollocks. Oh yeah, it does. Whew. Thought that wasn't going to fit then. That was a dramatic moment and a lot of swearing in my head. Next, friction plate. Thought, how can that be? Wemoto know everything. Why are they getting it wrong? But they're not. Just didn't look like it would fit there, but it does. If you spot me doing anything wrong, let me know in the comments below. I'm not saying I'm going to take it all in bits again, but whoops, be useful to know. Some of you old timers have got some handy tips now and again. Not all here, but some here. Keep feeling like I'm going to drop this in all the dirt and be annoyed. I'm wasting a bit of oil here, but now the reason I soak these overnight, I've had the clutch plates soaking in oil overnight. Obviously the bathed in oil in here. I think in that Haynes manual it just says to coat them in oil, it doesn't just say to soak them overnight, but I'm sure somebody once told me to do that, so certainly not going to do any harm to soak them overnight. I'd rather do that than not do. So it's all well lubricated. The wind keeps whipping up a bit, which I'm not liking, throwing dirt everywhere, but it's not quite that bad just yet. And then the final friction plate. I need to remember to put the new springs in, not the old ones. So your pressure plate is the final friction plate. Just borrow some of this oil that's leaking down to give that a bit of a coating. Get a bit on that bearing whilst I'm at it. Put a bit generally on it. It's all going to get bathed in oil when it starts spinning up, but it doesn't hurt to start it off. So that's your final one. Putting the new springs on. They look slightly longer, quite a bit longer, I'm surprised actually, but with bigger gaps in the coil than the ones that were on. They feel harder, so I hope it doesn't make the clutch really heavy. Worst case scenario, if it does, I'll have to whip it back off and put the old ones in maybe, but we will not know until we've given it a test ride. Imagine the original ones probably better quality, but we shall see. Getting these on loosely, I'll just spin them up a bit with the impact driver and then finish them off to torque spec, which I need to find out from the book. Seem to have a spare spring. Why is that? Have I accidentally muddled them up? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For some reason they give you a spare spring. If anybody knows why, comment below. Maybe it's just in case you lose them, don't know, maybe it's an accident. So like I say, I just loosely buzz these in, save me some time. Just do it till the plates are something like flush. And then we'll find out what the torque spec is. These should be tightened in a crisscross pattern to, let's have a look, clutch spring bolts to 9.3 Newton meters. So that's fairly like that, or 82 inch pounds, not foot pounds. So 9.3 Newton meters. I'll be using my small torque wrench for this one, good quality one, no bar. To keep your torque wrenches in spec, you should always run them down to nothing when you've used them, so put them up to the torque you need, and then when you're done with them, set them back to naught, or you'll end up with it out of spec. At least that's what I'm told. So what was it, 9.3 Newton meters. The only problem with this is it takes quite a lot of spinning to get it up to the setting that you want. 9 on the dial and 3 down here. So as I said, these should be done in a crisscross pattern. I'll do them all up below torque initially, just gradually keep doing them until till we get to torque. I know this isn't very crisscross, but I'm not at the torquing stage yet. We're getting there now. So, see, it's hardly anything. Torque those up. If you're doing that by hand without a torque wrench, you would easily over tighten those, I suspect. And you're into a soft alloy, I believe to be a relatively soft alloy. You want to be careful. I like to do them on a crisscross and then just go around them, like doing a wheel, just to make sure you've not missed anything. So that's ours all tightened up. And your dowels will help keep that located, or hopefully will do. It's a bit more of a shiny gasket than the one we removed. Hopefully the oil will just keep it in place. Push it so it sits flat, say. Hopefully that will stay there long enough while I go get the top plate. I like to just lubricate the mating surfaces with a bit of engine oil before putting it back. I don't know if that's the right thing to do or not, but it should hopefully stop it sticking. I need to get it off again. So the thing is here, just put a bit of oil on this sear or whatever you call it. So we need to make sure that that's not across when we're fitting the plate, so we get the plate on and then it wants to engage. Probably can't see in that dark hole, I'll show you here. So it wants to be sort of like that and then snip across like that. It feels like quite a lot of resistance on that, so I hope them springs are not super strong. Just hook that back in while I remember. And then I'll clean up my bolts that I took out and get them buzzed in. Now before you go ramming the screws in, just as you do it, I've just sort of loosened this plate again gently, because I just noticed the gasket was slightly oversailing some of the holes, so you might just need to wriggle it a little bit, just get a couple of bolts in to hold it in place and then start feeding in the rest. I also like to put a bit of copper grease on these just to stop any corrosion in the case, but just be careful with your torque specs because it can affect those. And I've cleaned up the bolts as well before putting them back in because they had a bit of old gasket stuck on them. So the final points, other than putting the oil plug back in and putting some oil in it, is just to get all these bolts tightened up. The manual says 11 Newton meters. I'm just going to buzz them all in loosely, and then I'll do them all up to 10 Newton meters using this because I've put grease on, and then I'll just see how I feel with that. I might leave them at 10. Still doing it crisscross, even though I'm not doing it tight yet, just for good practice. Crisscross as far as I can do it. That's them all loosely done. One downside to this torque wrench, it doesn't have a good snap to it, it just rocks on this, it doesn't like click like I like torque wrenches to do. That's the downside to it. I'm just getting them all something like first. Again, crisscross as you'll see where I can. That one did just torque. Might have already done some of these, so excuse me if I have, but my memory is terrible. So they're all there and thereabouts. I'll now torque them. I want to torque to, this is to 1 Newton meter under the specified torque, I should say. I'm trying to do it crisscross best I can. Might mean going over some more than once. I think that's all of them. No, it doesn't feel terribly tight to me, so I will do. I'm certainly not putting enough pressure to snap them, so I will go up to the specified 11 Newton meters. Then when I think I'm there, I'll just go around I'll start up here to the right of the oil filler when I think I've done them all, and just do a check to make sure I've not missed any. So that's all those torqued up, that tightened up, back in up here, and it's a firm pull, but I think KJ is strong enough to deal with that. I don't think it's, probably is a bit firmer than before, but they'll probably loosen up a bit, those springs. And the main thing is how smooth it's going to be. So I'll get the oil bung back in, fill it up with oil, and go for a ride. First impressions, it is a strongish pull, but it does engage smoother, and it doesn't snatch when you engage the gear from a standstill. The other one was obviously sticking or something, because would occasionally, obviously, it felt like it didn't release properly, so it would snatch and probably just break free. So I'll do a test here before we get to the road junction. It's funny riding this after riding the Royal Enfield and such. So, stand still. We knock it out of gear, so we're in neutral. Now the old one, if you, as you engage, you'd pull the clutch, and then as you knocked it into gear, see, no hand on the brake. As you knocked it into gear, it'd lurch forward a bit, so it was obviously a bit snatchy, sticky. Whereas this one doesn't do that. So I'll just show again. I'll have to keep my hand on the brake a little bit, stop me rolling backwards, but so I'm in neutral, and then you'll see engages and the bike doesn't move. Before, the bike would sort of snatch forwards, and then a nice smooth set off like that, and hopefully it should engage gears better, but we'll see. Just taking it for a reasonably decent run. In fact, I'll reset the I'll try to reset the trip counter. Give me an idea of how far we've gone. Not really keeping a good track of what gear I'm in. I think that'll be 5th. It's a funny little thing. See if that's 6th. That's probably in 6th now. Yeah, that's 6th. Four. I saw an aircraft moving. I dropped the gear then, I don't know. Again, that might just be 50, might be 4. So KJ, you've just done your little
long way round.
your little post office run on your newly improved bike. So just to recap, new clutch, handlebars, short on grips, bar ends off at Royal Enfield, even painted panels now, and put your sheepskin back on. Did you love it?
Yeah.
You look happy.
It was a lot of fun. It was so much more in control. I was throwing it around and everything. I was so good at turns. I was like, what's going on?
Is it like a different bike?
Yeah.
Good.
Totally was.
So we finally got there.
I'm
Yeah?
so excited. Yeah.
Good. Subscribe.